Alright, so we are going to be on the play here and forced to mulligan this, but we've got a bit better 6. Have to keep this. We got a map which can give us white. I think we want to keep the Anointed Procession on top of our library as well, which is going to be nice, assuming we pick up some token makers, which there's a few of them in this deck for sure. So we're pretty likely to draw something that makes tokens at some point or another. And there is the Spire Bluff Canal. So we can use the Renegade map as a Revolt enabler if we so choose to. And it looks like our opponent's actually playing a control deck, so that's not great news. I'm going to keep the Renegade map in play. In case we were to draw something like a hidden stockpile, we would want to be able to sacrifice the map on our own turn. Unfortunately, we don't have a very proactive hand, and if our opponent's playing a blue-red or Grixis type of control deck, that's not going to be great. We see Hostage Taker now, so it looks like our opponent is playing a Grixis deck. Now we are pretty much locked into using the Renegade map to get the planes. Fumigate, definitely not the best draw there. And I'm just going to go ahead and try for a cast out. It might get countered by something like a Censor, but I'm going to go for it. Just to get the Search for a Scana off the battlefield. That card just has a way of snowballing and allowing our opponent to loot cards or put cards in the graveyard every single turn. Helps with the draw step. Now, unfortunately, our opponent does have a second copy of Search and a Siren Storm Tamer. So it looks like this is some sort of weird pirate shenanigans that are going on. And I'm just going to push away the Storm Tamer. Not sure exactly what's going on, but our opponent could redirect the push anyways with the blue mana available. And we're just hoping to draw token makers at this point. We can activate the Ifnir Deadlands, and we have Fumigate in case of our opponent committing more creatures to the board. But we've already seen a couple cards, so we have to be thinking about future Hostage Takers. Here's a Kitesail Freebooter, so that's just going to nab the Fumigate right out of our hand. And this looks like a pretty cool deck. Gotta hand it to our opponent. Got some nice synergies going on here. We could sacrifice the Deadlands to get the Freebooter off the battlefield. But I don't think it's urgent. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just going to go ahead and pass with the Concealed Courtyard. And it looks like our opponent's been keeping cards on top with the Search for a Scana, which is a little bit scary because it's pretty likely that that means our opponent's hand is just chock full of gas. So, yeah, Anointed Priest seems worth casting. And sure, let's slow roll the Swamp. Still going to leave the Kitesail Freebooter in play. We should be able to get rid of that at some point. And it's not hitting us that hard. And there's a Glimmer of Genius. So our opponent's pulling out all the stops here. Fatal Push, Glimmer, and a host of pirates. Well, I'm enjoying playing against this deck because you don't get a chance to see these sorts of strategies that often in these competitive standard leagues. And you know what? This deck looks good. It's beating us right now. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully we can draw out of this situation. Of course, we did have to take a mulligan, unlike our opponent. Okay, Legion's Landing. That's something. And we also have this Anointed Priest in the graveyard. So I'm going to start by embalming the Anointed Priest. And that's going to create 2 Anointed Priests because of the Anointed Procession. Kind of cool right there. And now we can play the Legion's Landing, threatening to make 2 tokens and also gain some life with the Anointed Priest. But it looks like our opponent does have the Pirate counterspell, Lookout Dispersal, to stop our Legion's Landing. And you know what? I wasn't thinking about that as a potential counterspell. I probably should have been. But I was hoping to gain life off the Anointed Priest, which is why I went for the Embalm first. As it turns out, should have cast the Legion's Landing and then embalmed after that, but did not do it in that sequence. And now our opponent does have Iskana, the Sunken Ruin, and another search for Iskana. That's a pretty good draw, though. Another Legion's Landing. I'm going to start by getting in. We'll see what our opponent does here. Who knows? There could be some flash creatures or some shenanigans. But definitely hoping this Legion's Landing does resolve, and it looks like it's going to. That's pretty important here. Our opponent does get an activation. So this is going to be a pretty grindy game. Our opponent's going to be activating. Oh wow, there's a Fiery Cannonade. So that's going to be able to just sweep these tokens off the board. The vampires, that is, not the Anointed Priest, unless our opponent has 2 copies of Fiery Cannonade. Fiery Cannonade dealing 2 to each non-pirate creature, essentially a one-sided Pyroclasm in our opponent's deck. And as I mentioned earlier, still waiting on this Deadlands just because 1 damage. This Abzan Tokens deck can gain life pretty efficiently, so if our opponent is just clocking us for 1 a turn, it's not really anything to worry about too much. And so the Storm Tamer actually does counter abilities, so it could counter or redirect the Ifnir Deadlands. And now we've drawn Hidden Stockpile, another good draw step. So looks like our opponent's going to let us attack, which is going to now trigger the Legion's Landing. I wonder if our opponent thought about Fiery Cannonade before we were able to get in. But maybe he's trying to... Nope, just going to take it. Interesting. Well, now I like going for this Hidden Stockpile for sure. And yeah, I think it's worth using the Ifnir Deadlands on the Storm Tamer, because it is going to trigger Revolt in this situation, and the Storm Tamer could redirect that effect anyway. We don't really want our Fumigate back because we're not really planning on wrathing the board right now, so we're not really in too much of a need of that. Now here's another copy of Glimmer of Genius that our opponent has found. So our opponent's going to be able to dig through most of their deck in terms of finding non-creature spells. So we're just going to have to hope that there's nothing too powerful in our opponent's deck to be able to grab. off these Ascanta activations. But pretty interesting game here going on. We're going to be able to start scrying, which is going to mean that our opponent's essentially scrying each turn with Search for Ascanta. But now that we have the hidden stockpile, we can do the same. Plus, we have Adanto the First, which is going to be able to create tokens for us each turn. So it's weird, but I think I prefer our spot, but it's definitely, it's an interesting game. And we don't know exactly what our opponent has access to, other than that Fiery Cannonade and that Glimmer of Genius. So the Fiery Cannonade can be used to just get rid of most of our creatures. But the Anointed Priests are the ones that are gaining us the life and really making it difficult for our opponent to get any sort of significant pressure going. And here's an Abrade. I'm going to go ahead and take a Scry. Start to finish, yeah, that seems pretty good here. That would allow us to make 4 tokens, and then also we could use the back half of it. But, alright, there's the Fiery Cannonade. Fair game. So I think we may just want to main phase this start here, just to make sure we gain the life from the Anointer Priest. We're going to be casting it anyways, might as well main phase it, play around some sort of counter magic. And then we also still have Adanto at the ready with conveniently exactly 3 lands available to us. Although, wow, so our opponent's actually found a Field of Ruin. So that is an answer to Adanto. Ooh, so that's going to be annoying because that's going to... I mean, Adanto is one of our best ways of having inevitability in the late game, and now our opponent has the ability to get it off the board. I am going to go ahead and activate it, get us 2 more vampires, but if our opponent has another Fiery Cannonade, that would certainly be bad news. And maybe time for our opponent to just kind of leave back this Kitesail Freebooter. Yeah, I think I like just making the attack with everything here. So unless our opponent's able to draw a Fiery Cannonade, these tokens may just get the job done. We have the back half of the start to finish still in our graveyard as well, which is worth noting. Notably, could have taken a Scry upkeep, but that would have meant losing an additional token, so chose not to. And we see our opponent digging through their deck. There's a Scarab God hitting the graveyard. And this main phase Glimmer indicates searching for an answer right now, like a Fiery Cannonade. looks like our opponent was able to find an opt. And that's actually going to be game one. So our opponent was able to do a lot of digging, but not find what they were looking for. So now we've got some sideboard decisions to make, because obviously this isn't a known deck, this Grixis Pirate deck, so just going to have to make this decision on the fly. I like the idea of Angel of Sanctions as a versatile removal spell. I think we can shave on Fumigate. We saw how low impact it would have been in those games. Treasure Map seems like a possibility, so does Duress. Cut a Vraska here. I think we can even cut maybe a Cast Out just to try to make the deck a little bit leaner. Fatal Push seems alright. Although we don't know exactly how our opponent's boarding, if they're taking out creatures or not. But Fumigate does seem pretty bad, so I think we're okay with just signing out all of the copies of Fumigate, actually. Let's try this. So, ported in a couple Duresses, some Treasure Maps, an Angel of Sanctions. Pretty durable threats, and then some discard, which makes sense in a control matchup. The Fatal Push can take out a card like a Siren, Storm Tamer, or a Kitesail Freebooter. So I think it makes sense to keep those in, but as I was saying, we'll just have to wait and see how our opponent chooses to proceed. The Argyll's Bloodfast is a card I like against straight control. We're kind of up against a little bit of an aggro control deck, so same thing, Duress. We saw a lot of creatures. Normally I would board in 4 copies of those, but since we're keeping in some removal like Fatal Push, I don't think we can board in all 4. So I'm going to try this. Alright, well, it looks like we're both going to be able to keep our hands. Got a token-heavy synergy hand, which is kind of nice. And our opponent has their best possible play for turn 1 as well. The Storm Tamer, of course. But it looks like our opponent does not have a follow-up to that. So I'm just going to go ahead and go for an Anointer Priest here. And we can follow that up next turn with probably another Anointer Priest. We want to be able to flip the Legion's Landing as quickly as possible. And we're okay with the Anointer Priest dying. We can always embalm it later. This game isn't ending anytime soon, really. It's definitely a grindy sort of a matchup. But I wonder if our opponent is actually missing black mana. We see 3 copies of Spirebluff Canal in play. And there's Lookout Dispersal. Certainly don't have the 4 mana to pay for it. We could have continued with just playing a second Legion's Landing, but I don't think we need to push the issue too much. Just going to play out this Renegade map. And now our opponents answered our Anointer Priest 1 for 1, but now we can embalm them. So it's really more or less card advantage for our side. Could go for start to finish, but I think just rather start embalming for this turn. We're going to be able to flip the Legion's Landing. It's just a matter of time. Next turn, we can go something like Anointer Priest plus start to finish. What we would like to find is an Anointed Procession or a Hidden Stockpile so that we're more resilient against a card like Fiery Cannonade. And there, speak of the devil, there's Anointed Possession. And it does appear that our opponent's a little bit mana screwed. So I definitely like trying to resolve the possession. Our opponent might have another counterspell, but if not, this is going to be pretty game-breaking, I think. But it looks like our opponent does have it. And there's the Drowned Catacombs as well, which is what our opponent was looking for. Well, I like trying to get this treasure map into play. It's going to allow us to scry and create some more late game inevitability. And once again, like last game, our opponent's not getting any sort of significant pressure on us. There's a Fatal Push. Don't even think we need that for this Storm Tamer. It looks like our opponent is getting ready to potentially block here, which is fine. I don't mind that. Okay, it looks like our opponent just chose not to attack with that Storm Tamer. Intriguing choice, to say the least. And there's a Fiery Cannonade kind of being fired off pretty aggressively. I'm not sure I would have gone for it right there. Just because it was only really answering one token. It's one of the scarier cards our opponent has access to. That being said, our opponent seems to be trying to immediately flip this Search for a Scanna, although still only 6 cards in the graveyard. But that was the draw step, the Scarab God, which is why our opponent chose not to mill anything. But on our turn, we're going to be able to flip the Legion's Landing, which is pretty nice. I think I like going for an upkeep Scry. There's a duress, but our opponent only has one card in hand. I think we can bottom that. Now we're getting the treasures, so these treasures could definitely come in handy. And there's a cast out, which is a great draw because it's just an easy answer to the Scarab God. So I think we want to just use the cast out now. Our opponent's tapped out, cannot use the Siren Storm Tamer to redirect the cast out, or to counter the cast out rather. So I'm just going to get rid of the Scarab God, and then we can get this Legion's Landing into play if we want to. But I'm not even sure we do want to play the second Legion's Landing. We're in a pretty good spot. Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. I'm just going to pass here. So pretty good, pretty swingy turn. I think it worked out in our favor. We can start sacrificing these treasures to draw cards with the Treasure Cove. We can also use them for mana if we find ourselves in that situation. So we've got multiple lands that are going to be tricky for our opponent to answer, whereas our opponent does have Azcanta, but like the first game, this game is playing out pretty similarly, actually. Our opponent is now forced into a spot where they're digging. So let's go ahead and take a draw. All right, so not the best couple of draw steps. We do have the Shafet Dunes that we can potentially use next turn to try to just win the game. And yeah, this 1-for-1 removal strategy of our opponents just is not working out. I think our opponents use 3 spot removal spells on Anointer Priest, and we can just embalm them. So it's literally just a 2-for-1 in our favor. And with our opponent at 8, we can make another token. Our opponent's only got 1 card left in hand. So even if our opponent's able to find removal, it's just not... spot removal spells are not the way you want to fight this Abzan token deck. Completely the opposite. You want mass removal, and you want creatures that can go over the top, and it doesn't seem like our opponent has enough of that sort of stuff. So, yep, let's go ahead and make a vampire. So we have the option here of just kind of going for the win. So let's go ahead and start by drawing a card here. Give us a little bit more information. And, yeah, I mean, our opponent does have a blocker. I think we just activate the Shafet Dunes and let our opponent chump with this Siren Storm Tamer. That seems pretty good. Our opponent doesn't have 3 mana, so they don't have access to Fiery Cannonade at the moment. All right, there's an interesting one. Bantu's Last Reckoning. It's gonna sweep away our board, but we still have plenty going on. So I'm going to make a vampire. We could actually just sack the Shifet Dunes, force our opponent to have a removal for the vampire. That's one option. Don't think it's the best option though. I think we can wait a turn. So I like attacking with the vampire. Now our opponent's lands are not untapping, remember. So it's pretty unlikely our opponent has any way out of this. And we still have this Legion's Landing that I've basically been keeping in hand for the whole game. Just really no reason to cast it, because if our opponent Field of Ruins Adanto, we want to have the option to have a second copy. So it looks like our opponent's taking, well, okay, no, it's going to be a Torrential Gearhulk. But you know what? That's perfectly fine, because our opponent's lands are not untapping. And so we actually just have the win here next turn, essentially. Because there are Anointer Priests in the graveyard. Only one. I think we've embalmed 2. Is that right? So I'm going to get this Legion's Landing into play. Go ahead and use the Anointer Priest. And our opponent has no way out at this point. So that is going to be the match here.